Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Maralen of the Mornsong. So Maralen of the Mornsong is a 3-mana 2/3. Players can't draw cards. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player loses 3 life, searches their library for a card, puts it into their hand, and then shuffles. So basically, instead of drawing cards, you cast Grim Tutor. Now the obvious downside here, of course, is that the moment that you cast Maralen and pass the turn, the first thing that your opponent can do is go tutor up a removal spell and kill Maralen. Or, even if they don't choose to do that, allowing your opponents to tutor for the exact card they want in EDH is pretty bad. So the main thing that we want to do with Maralen is we want to make it so that our opponents cannot search their decks. And in the case of EDH, there is exactly one card that's going to allow us to do that. And it's, of course, Opposition Agent. So the main thing that this deck is trying to do is it's trying to land a Maralen and an Opposition Agent at the same time so that your opponent cannot draw cards or search their deck anymore. Now, aside from that, what else is the deck doing? So, we've got our card draw, but specifically in this deck, most of our card draw cannot be built around literally drawing cards. It has to be gone around getting cards in a way that doesn't technically draw them. So we've got Ad Nauseam, Bolas's Citadel, Dark Confidant, Necrodominance, Necropotence, Skullclamp. Now, obviously, Necrodominance and Skullclamp actually do draw the cards, whereas all of the other ones get around them. These are more for before you have Maralen in play. And then our one combo besides Opposition Agent is, since we're playing Citadel, we can do the Aetherflux Reservoir Sensei's Divining Top trick, where once you have a Bolas's Citadel and you hit your Reservoir and you hit top, you can just draw a card, put top back on top of the deck, then you cast top for 1 life, triggering the Aetherflux Reservoir, and you will always gain more life than it costs you to cast this. So you get to draw your whole deck, and then just laser beam everyone with Aetherflux Reservoir. Over in fast mana, again, we're trying to just get out Maralen and Opposition Agent as quickly as possible. So we've got Blood Pet, Cabal Ritual, Culling the Weak, Dark Ritual, Lotus Petal, and Rain of Filth. Now, specifically, our options for fast mana are pretty limited. So some of the cards, like Culling the Weak, obviously revolve around having cheap creatures. So we are going to be playing creatures that their only purpose in the deck is just to be free. And we'll get to that when we get to it. We have pretty straightforward lands. The main differences here are that we have 17 basics. We've got the Urborg Cabal Coffers pair, and we've got Phyrexian Tower. Fault of Whispers is to basically just enable Mox Opal, and Urza's Cave can fetch any of these things, particularly Coffers Urborg. Also, you may be wondering why we're running fetch lands in our mono black deck. We are running them because they work with Bolas's Citadel. These lands allow us to manipulate the top card of our deck when that matters. For protection, obviously, the whole deck is going to revolve around Maralen being in play, so we need to make sure Maralen doesn't die or get countered. So we've got Defense Grid, Imp's Mischief to redirect spells, Lightning Greaves, Smoke Bomb. All creatures have Shroud, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Smoke Bomb. When you do, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So this is more along the lines of just giving Maralen Shroud at the cheapest rate possible. It also gives Opposition Agent Shroud, but we can obviously only use it for 1 turn. And then we've got Hand Disruption, Duress, Inquisition of Kozilek, and Thoughtseize. So just point this at the player who you think is most likely to have Disruption, an interaction for you, and take their interaction. Or point it at the player who you think is going to combo off and take their combo. Then we got a bunch of ramp. Springleaf Drum is in here because we're going to be running cheap creatures for specifically Culling the Weak and Skullclamp. And then we also have Crypt Gas to get ahead on mana. So one of the things is we can't necessarily turbo out Maralen Oppo Agent. We might have to get to a point where we just have a bunch of mana and we can play them both on the same turn. Or we go end of opponent's turn, flash out Opposition Agent, untap, cast Maralen. And that's what things like Crypt Gas are going to be helpful for. We also have Jet Medallion to reduce the cost of all of our black spells. We've got 1 Reanimate. This is for if Maralen does get killed, we can potentially just leave her in the graveyard and then reanimate her, but in general, I wouldn't count on it. A little bit of removal. And then the main thing we're going to be relying on is Stax. So we've got Chains of Mephistopheles. Since we already have Maralen to make it so that people can't draw, we have certain synergies in our deck that rely on that. So Chains is just another way of doing that in case Maralen isn't out. Then we got Cursed Totem, Dothy Voidwalker, Opposition Agent, obviously, Karn the Great Creator to shut off opposing Mono Rocks, Winter Moon, which works very well with our many basic swamps. We also have Vexing Bauble. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana is meant to cast it, counter it. This shuts off a whole bunch of different things. Some things that immediately come to mind are like LED out of the graveyard from Underworld Breach. Torpor Orb to shut off ETBs. We mostly don't have ETBs. And then the big ones that are specifically for this mono black deck is Contamination and Infernal Darkness. So Contamination, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Contamination unless you sack a creature. If a land is tapped for mana, it produces black instead of any other type and amount. So we can color screw our opponents. Infernal Darkness essentially does the same thing. Cumulative upkeep, black and 1 life. All lands produce black instead of their normal mana. Now, Infernal Darkness will eventually run out. We can't just keep paying this cumulative upkeep of black and a life every turn, but we can use it as a delay, as a stopgap to get to what we need. Contamination requires us to stack a creature every turn, and that is where our recursive creature is going to come into play. So way down here in the uncategorized cards is Nether Spirit. At the beginning of your upkeep, if it's the only creature card in your graveyard, you may return it to the battlefield. So we're not necessarily guaranteed for this to be our only creature in the graveyard, but if it is, we can keep bringing this back every single upkeep and keep paying for Contamination. Additionally, we also have Bitter Blossom, which is another way that we can keep having a creature every turn to pay for Contamination. Then you'll also notice a bunch of 0 mana creatures. These are just here again to pay for Culling the Weak, or to have Springleaf Drum get tapped for and turn Springleaf Drum into a 1 mana ramp thing, or to Skull Clamp these and then sacrifice them to some sacrifice effect, which is one of the reasons that Phyrexian Tower is in the deck, to draw cards. Then we've got a Toxic Deluge, and then finally a whole bunch of Tutors. So it's a lot of the usual suspects. The main noteworthy cards here are Entomb, which can entomb an opposition agent if we already have Reanimate, and then we can reanimate the opposition agent. It can also entomb Nether Spirit if it's, again, the only creature that we have in the graveyard. And Praetor's Grasp, which in this case basically gives us a second copy of Opposition Agent. So Opposition Agent is an incredibly played black spell. It's in a ton of black decks. So we can use this in case something happens to our first Opposition Agent, or just use this as a essentially 6 mana Opposition Agent to go tutor our opponent's Oppo Agent. But with all that said, that is going to do it for Maralen of the Mornsong in EDH.